Hello and welcome to the Lowdown, the third ever episode of our brand new show on Sky Sports Premier League, dropping every Friday afternoon, where we will be providing deeper analysis than anywhere else on Sky Sports. Today we are talking about the big clubs that could flop this season, hear about our concerns about Chelsea under Enzo Maresca.
It just already feels like there's so much pressure there.
I'm just concerned as to why the appointment was made of him at Chelsea, whether or not it's for all the right reasons.
I wouldn't wish that upon really any manager.
Could Man City face a drop-off this season?
It does feel like Arteta is slowly getting the better of Pep. You know, unbeaten against him last season, won more big games, came through in bigger moments.
And are people overhyping Tottenham Hotspur?
I don't think they're to the level of if you want to be a Champions League team. I think Newcastle will finish above Tottenham this season.
Yes, welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. It is my great pleasure to introduce your lineup for the Lowdown today. We've got everyone's favourite YouTuber, Nieve. Welcome, Nieve. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Great to see you. Mikey McCubbin is back for more.
Yeah.
How are you, Mikey? Surviving the window?
Just about, yeah. Just about. Nearly over. But yeah, no, all good, Diggs. Yeah, back once again. Good to have you back on board as well.
Back.
How was your holiday?
It was very nice, thank you. Missed my flight on the way out there, which was a bit of a disaster. Got a very sunburnt back. But other than that, it was just win after win. Love Croatia. Shout out Croatia. But let's get into today's show. Today we are discussing the big clubs that could flop this season. Now, we've each gone away and thought of three main candidates and maybe a backup in there too. So we'll see how we get on. Nieve, I want to give you the honours. Who do you think is the big club that could flop this season?
I mean, when you word it in the flop way, it kind of feels scary to say somebody, because we have still got over 2 weeks. It's a good question. I think, Wolves is one I'm just a bit concerned about in the short term, but it's nothing that can't be fixed. But I just look at, obviously they've lost Neto, and there's a little bit of speculation over Podence as well. We don't know whether or not his future's at Wolves. And also defensively, I'm a little bit concerned about them. I feel like there's quite a bit that needs fixing at Wolves. And I had a look at the start of the season fixtures they've got, and they're really difficult. And it could come at the worst time for them, and they could find themselves in hot water around Christmas time. So I'm a little bit concerned about them.
Okay, fair enough. And you mentioned Neto's departure as well, but Max Kilman as well feels like a big one. Do you think that they might be a little destabilised defensively and just lacking that little bit of attacking threat? Or do you expect maybe Strand Larsen, who's come in, to have an impact?
Yeah, I think Wolves could really do with? I think they could really do with a nasty attacking player. I noticed towards the end of last season, when they were really struggling to win games, I thought they had a terrible end to the season. The big thing I noticed was, I think they could really do with a player who's got that game awareness, and he gets in your face a little bit and is a bit of a frustration. I think perhaps they look a bit too nice, and so that's something I think they could really improve with.
Okay. And do you think, there was a lot of praise, and I thought rightly so, for Gary O'Neill at points last season. I think on particular, on the back of that appearance on Monday Night Football, people really woke up to his sort of preparation and his tactical ingenuity, let's say. Are you a Gary O'Neill fan?
I am. He did also play for Bolton Wanderers, who are my team, so I am a fan of him. And I'm a fan of him at Wolves as well. I feel like he's the right man at the right time, at the right club at this moment, and we'll see how he copes throughout the season. But he needs to be backed, and I don't quite think they've done enough of that for him yet. And looking at the way Wolves have been with other managers in previous years, I wonder how much they are going to actually back him, and how much they're going to just make him do it, what needs to be done, and what their ambition is. I also question that a little bit too.
Okay, there we have it. I mean, there was a lot of pressure on Cunha and Hwang last year. Sasa Kalajdzic obviously didn't work out as a move, getting injured in, I think it was his first game pretty much. Fabio Silva's never really clicked at Wolves as well. So big pressure on Strand Larsen. Hopefully he can get going and solve their number 9 issues, although Cunha was, I think, pretty solid last year. Mikey, we've heard an early shout for Wolves. Yep. Where do you want to go next?
I'm going to go for a big hitter. I'm going to go for a bit of an obvious one. It feels almost a bit like cheating to pick Chelsea as a potential flop.
Get in there.
If we look back to, say, March, April time of this year, I think most Premier League fans, let alone Chelsea fans, probably would have said that come August, they would be considering Chelsea to be a real favourite for the top 4, 8, maybe even the top 3, given how well they were playing towards the end of last season, and that it looked like they were finally going to turn a corner in the kind of Todd Burley, Clear Lake capital, that's it, era. And it just feels like they're starting all over again. Of course, I don't think any Chelsea fan by the end wanted Pochettino to leave, even though there was, a bit of a toxic atmosphere around Stamford Bridge around the kind of February time before results started to pick up. But it felt like he was doing as good a job as anyone could have done with that squad. With such a young squad, he was a specialist in that regard. Like looking back at, with his time at Tottenham, working with a very young squad there, he seemed like a good fit. And it was just that kind of past at Tottenham and potentially any disagreements he was having with the hierarchy at Chelsea, that was going to hold him back. And eventually that proved to be the case. He really wanted Conor Gallagher to stay, and all the noises coming out of Chelsea was that they wanted to sell him even from December last year. It looked like that would be the case, and I wonder whether by the time people are watching this, whether the Gallagher situation even will be resolved. And that's already been a bit of a headache for Maresca, who came out in the press and talking about kind of PSR and how it's been an issue for Premier League clubs in general. Like that's already something that's like could threaten to define his time as manager. And it's just a huge ask for Maresca to come in off the back of the relative success that Pochettino was threatening to have at Chelsea. And let's not forget, Chelsea did finish 5 points off the top 4 in the end last year.
With a huge improvement from the year before.
With a big stylistic improvement. I think they ranked 5th for expected goals in the league last year. I think they ranked a bit lower for expected goals against, but generally speaking, actually last year was not a vintage year for Premier League defences. Like a lot of goals were let in, and generally speaking, the kind of aside from City and Arsenal, I don't think you could really say that there was a really, really outstanding defence. Maybe Liverpool at points in the year, but Van Dijk had to dig them out quite a lot. So I don't think you can blame them too much in that regard. And defensive solidity is something that can come with time, especially when you've got a ton of different young centre backs who are coming in. Thiago Silva had a bit of a drop off as well, but he's obviously out the door now. So again, they've lost a leadership figure there. It remains a very young squad. They've done yet more kind of major surgery to the squad this season. They've got, I think, something like plus 50 squad members.
Do you think that can ever work?
I mean, it hasn't so far, has it? Let's face it. I think the squad size did come down a little bit last season, and I think that was a positive, of course. But it feels like we're in danger of Maresca being in a Graham Potter situation where you've got players having to go to the cafe down the road to get changed or whatever it is. But I just worry a bit. Like, this is Enzo Maresca's first ever top flight season as a manager. Like, I think he's got 67 games under his belt as a senior coach. I think, I'm not sure that the percentages, but some of that was with Parma in Serie B, and the majority of that was with Leicester last year. And there's no denying that he got Leicester playing brilliant football last year, especially in the first half of the season, and was able to implement a really good style of play. But it's very different to the Pochettino style of play. There's way less emphasis on pressing, far more emphasis on build up from the back, and being patient with the ball. And that's why we've seen Ben Chilwell effectively frozen out. I think it's Vega who they've brought in, defensive midfielder by trade, but he's ahead of Chilwell in the left back kind of pecking order. I think that will suit someone like Marc Cucurella. I think it might actually suit Reece James as well, even Malo Gusto. Like, both of those players have experience of bringing the ball into midfield and inverting a little bit more. But whether that's actually the strength of the Chelsea squad overall remains to be seen. And it's just such a big task managing all those players,
all those egos,
all those players who are on huge contracts and have been at the club maximum 2 years, implementing a new style of play in a league that you've not managed in before. I think it's just and also he doesn't really have money in the bank because he doesn't have the prestige of, say, a Pochettino, who can be like, well, like you can back me, through a month or two of really bad form because I've shown that I can come through that at clubs like Tottenham and PSG. Like Maresca doesn't have that, doesn't have that backing behind him. So I just do feel like, I feel like it's a big risk.
I hear you. I mean, Nieve, you watched a lot of Maresca at Leicester last year, I imagine. He did dip towards the end of the season quite dramatically. There were at points where it looked like automatic promotion was even a little bit up in the air. Do you agree with Mikey that this task might just prove too big for him?
I'm just concerned as to why the appointment was made of him at Chelsea, whether or not it's for all the right reasons. We can't make a call on it. I think, different managers suit different tasks. We've seen managers who perform at elite level with elite level teams struggle with those lesser teams. Although, to be fair, I feel like any manager could have taken Leicester City up with that team last season. It's to be expected. One thing I would say about Maresca that concerned me was he had quite a stubborn nature, I'd say, with Leicester. There was a time where you almost felt like, do you need to pass it out the back this time? Can you not do something else? Do you really need to? Do you always have to build it up? And we've seen that be detriment to a lot of top teams in the last few years, I'd say, that stubbornness to having to play a certain way every single time. But my question really is, what would make it a flop season for Chelsea? Because the thing is, how far in the table do they have to be low down? What teams have to finish above them for it to be a bad season?
I mean, I think if they don't finish top six, then it has to be seen as a bit of a disappointing. I think if they can't maintain the level that they had last year, I think it has to be, and not just because it's Chelsea Football Club and they're big and they should expect to qualify for the Champions League every year. I think it's for the sake of this project as well. Like how many more years can Chelsea realistically? I know we said this last year, and I know we said this the year before. So it feels like Chelsea will always be able to pull off transfer business and squad building when we expect them not to. I think, even this time last year, I think it was on a Team Talk episode on Football Daily, where I think I suggested that Pochettino wouldn't be in the job this time next year, and everyone disagreed with me because on the logic that they can't afford to do it, but they could afford to do it in the end, and they've still been able to afford to spend more money in the transfer market than anyone else this summer. So I feel like at this point, if Chelsea aren't challenging for top four, then it has to be seen as a flop. 1.3 billion euros I think they've spent since Todd Boehly came in, and I think that's the thing. Chelsea could have been coming into the season as quite a settled squad with not actually that much work that needed to be done to it. Maybe a midfielder here or a left back there. Maybe before we saw what Cucurella was capable of at the Euros, at least. There wasn't a huge amount of surgery. A goalkeeper, I guess, would have been a priority for them, and obviously they've signed a ton of goalkeepers. But I think the barometer for Chelsea now just has to be backing up that investment. But that's not to say that Chelsea fans should expect that to be backed up, because they've got a relatively inexperienced manager in position. They don't even know really who the number one goalkeeper is this season. I think it's probably going to be Sanchez, but he struggled at points last year. They've got Jorgensen in from Villarreal, who's going to be itching to get minutes because he was, their number one last year too. So there's just so many question marks going into this season, and they also, similarly to Wolves, they just don't have a very good run-in from the start. You've got Man City in the first game. I think they also played Palace at some point in those first few games. They don't have easy games, Chelsea. So the fear is that the atmosphere at Stamford Bridge could already be beginning to turn on Enzo Maresca even by October if he can't make a statement. And pre-season they haven't looked amazing. They got a draw at home to Inter in their last pre-season game, and I think by all accounts that was an improved display from what we saw against Man City in the States, which had alarm bells ringing. And obviously you can't look too much into pre-season, but it just already feels like there's so much pressure there, and it's just such a I wouldn't wish that upon really any manager. to be in the position that Enzo Maresca's in.
Absolutely. I mean, they're having to loan out or sell, over 15, 20 players probably in the next couple of weeks into a market where everyone's got PSR concerns. The biggest expenditure on one single player in the Premier League this year is, £60 million on Domenic Solanke, around that fee. They've already spent that fee on Pedro Neto. The Conor Gallagher deal is not yet confirmed with Atletico Madrid, which is one that they probably banked on to equalise their PSR. This amount of players on your books is just not workable, and you can't see them. Basically, I think they've signed so many players hoping to find the next Vinicius Junior or Rodrigo, but the reason they became the next Rodrigo or Vinicius Junior was they were given game time and patience. And at the moment, Chelsea just have had no patience in the last 2 years whatsoever. 3 years into this project, you've got to be close to the top 4. And is anyone sure that they're going to be anywhere close to the top 4 this year? I'm not so sure when there's 3 quality teams at the top. There's a Man United side that have strengthened very well. There's a much more settled Aston Villa side. And there's Ange Postecoglou's Spurs who have made some stride forwards as well. So it just doesn't feel like even a top 6 place is necessarily guaranteed.
I will say this, though. I mean, as much as there is a chance of, them disappointing this season, if they are going to impress, if they are going to actually build on last season, it could just be a case of that attack clicking. Properly. I mean, it did click last year, but if you've got a fully fit Nkunku there and you're able to integrate him into a side with Cole Palmer and Pedro Neto
behind
Nicholas Jackson, that's a pretty nice forward line. I think there are a lot of Arsenal would almost certainly take Pedro Neto and Nkunku in their forward line, not necessarily starting, but I mean on the left, you'd take one of them. I would say, I think most top Premier League clubs would take a variation of that forward line in some way, shape or form. Cole Palmer probably makes any forward line in the country, so there is clearly the quality there, and if they can adapt to a more possession-based style of play and it suits that attack, then maybe Maresca, maybe it will be a piece of genius. Maybe it will be the best appointment they've ever made. But it's just you're relying on them clicking quite quickly, and Pedro Neto and Nkunku staying fit for an entire season, which I don't know when the last time we saw that was.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Pedro Neto has missed over 100 games in the last 4 seasons, and I think you're totally right to point out these exciting attacking players that they've signed, but it's the quantity of players around that and the age profile of the players around that they need game time, that they need patience to develop, and it just doesn't feel like they're going to get it at Chelsea. But to be honest, I think we could do 50 minutes on Chelsea by themselves. Yeah. Let's move on to my suggestion for the big club that could flop this year, and I'm going with Man City. Now,
huge.
This is a big claim. Obviously, in terms of flop, what is a flop for Man City? They're not going to flop. It's not going to finish outside the top 4. They're not probably even going to finish 3rd. But I think there's a very decent chance that they don't win the league. And given the fact they've won, 6 of the last 7, given the fact they've won 4 in a row, aiming for 5 this season, would still be a surprise. Last year they weren't at their best. They dropped points in 10 league games. The last time they did so, dropped more than that, was in 2021. So a decent one while ago. They won the league by 2 points. And you look at the summer business, and I think they've left themselves open. I really do. I think Julian Alvarez, I can totally understand why you need to accept that fee. Over £82 million, was it in the end, having signed them for £14 million 2 years ago. He's proved to be a brilliant signing. He was, if not happy with the squad position, was able to play a variety of positions, was happy coming off the bench as well. He only ever actually started 6 Champions League games in 2 seasons for Man City. But he was still a crucial member in their Premier League squad last year. He was 5th for minutes. He started more games than Erling Haaland. He ended up with 11 goals and 9 assists. That's really crucial output. And Erling Haaland missed 15 games last year with injury. Who is their backup number 9? They don't actually have one at the moment, especially with Hamilton being sold as well. You could use Phil Foden as a false 9. You could use Kevin De Bruyne as a false 9, as they have in the past. But there's no natural player there. You're backing for Rodri to stay remarkably injury-free. I think he's passed 50 games in 4 of his 6 seasons at City. The 4 games that he missed last year in the Premier League, Man City lost 3 of them. Maybe that will continue, but the fact that Calvin Phillips is nearing an exit, according to reports, they don't have a natural 6 to replace Rodri. Kevin De Bruyne's now 33, becoming increasingly injury-prone, as magnificent as he is. Bernardo Silva's now 30. I just don't think that this squad is quite where it needs to be to challenge an Arsenal side. They're getting better and better every year, that have Declan Rice and Kai Havertz a year further into their adaptation to Arsenal, that have brought a really top quality defender in Calafiori, that have Yuri and Timber back from injury as well. It just feels like momentum from this transfer window is all with Arsenal. And the fact that Man City have spent a lot of their transfer window fending off interest in De Bruyne, in Edison, and only strengthening with Savio, who I think is a really high quality player. You know, amazing last year at Girona. You know, only contributed one fewer goal than Vinicius Jr. in the league, more than Nico Williams, who of course was one of the stars of Euro 2024. But he played most of his minutes last year on the left, where they've got Doku, Grealish, Phil Foden. On the right-hand side, which Pep Guardiola says he can play, which he didn't play last year, and that was his only year in a top 5 league. They've got Oscar Bob, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden can play out there, but is Savio really going to be used from the right? I'm not so sure. So I just think they are one injury to Erling Haaland or Rodri away from, if not a disaster, a disappointing season. So flop is maybe a bit far, but Nieve, do you share my concerns that City have left themselves a little open this window?
No.
I
I also don't share any concerns that anything is a flop for them either. I think when you've won 4 Premier Leagues in a row, nothing is. Because realistically, as you said, there is only so low that they can be in that table, and it's just not possible. I do think this season we'll see a lot more youth in Manchester City. We already saw a little bit of it in pre-season. And Pep loves doing that. He loves giving players minutes. I think Rico Lewis will feature quite heavily this season, which will be exciting to watch. As you said, Oscar Bob as well. Yeah, I agree with Rodri. I do agree that having a player that can come in and occupy that role, but it's a hard position to get players. It's such a hard position. You know, they've got Rodri. At least they've got one. How many teams have even got one at the end of the day? And, you know, I think in terms of Haaland as well, when he doesn't play, they've got the players to make it work. They've done it before without needing a number 9. I don't think they particularly need one now as a backup. I just think it would be getting players for players' sake, where they're in a position now where they could be giving minutes to the next generation of Manchester City, and that's their academy. And I think that's what they do so well at Manchester City, is they develop footballers.
Do you think there could be a sense of Pep Guardiola? You know, we don't know whether he's going to sign a new contract. There's a lot of, you know, feeling that this could be his final year. Do you think there's maybe a feeling of like Pep, you know, priming those young academy players a little bit more this season, so that whoever takes over from him has a bit more of a settled kind of squad?
I do wonder that, and I do also wonder if we know what Pep's like, and he loves a challenge, loves to challenge himself. I think if he was able to win this 5th Premier League, and he also did that by bringing in 3 or 4 names that were the new stars, look, McAtee as well looks really good. That is an achievement, and I think he'll hold his head up with that. I think he cares really deeply about Manchester City. And like you say, I do think he wants to leave them in a really good position.
I would be excited if I was a City fan seeing this youth. They have kind of completed football in the last 4-5 years or so. You know, they've, you know, best points tally in Premier League history, doing a treble. It is exciting seeing young players come through, and they had that with Cole Palmer. They've obviously got it with Phil Foden, and McAtee and Oscar Bob look like they've got huge futures as well. I just think James McAtee, you know, has played 8 games for City. He got 3 goals and 3 assists for Sheffield United last season. Oscar Bob has only ever started, I think, 4 league games. Sorry, only ever started 2 league games for City. It just feels like there's more risk with City than ever before. And I just think they've left themselves open to an Arsenal side that haven't really slipped.
Yeah, I guess the other concern for me would be is that, yeah, they do have these young players, but a lot of them seem to be in quite similar positions. Like James McAtee is going to be trying to get minutes, ideally, in a kind of central attacking midfield position where you've got Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden vying for minutes. You know, it looks like Bernardo will probably play the majority of minutes in the centre this season. You know, Oscar Bob out wide. Maybe he'll have a bit more luck, but yeah, it does feel like, yeah, that they're all vying for a kind of similar, kind of all the kind of Pep positions really, kind of like, you know, like not out and out strikers, not out and out wingers, but kind of players who can kind of operate, kind of technicians in and around the box. And that's why I was kind of quite keen for McAtee to get a loan somewhere, and like particularly like Leicester, I thought would have been a good fit for him, but they've gone and got Buonanotte on loan now. So that, I think that door would have been closed, hypothetically, because it was probably never open in reality, aside from in my own mind. But I do get it from Pep's perspective. But equally, it's like right now, my feeling is that Arsenal will edge the league this year because they are on that upward trajectory. But if City were to just lose out to Arsenal this season, then I don't think you can really see
How
it as
come
that
they're
much
on an
fun.
upwards trajectory though? What makes Arsenal an upwards when they didn't win the league?
They've got
Because
better
they-
every year, I think. I think every year under Arteta they've improved. They've obviously cut the gap from, 5 points the year before last to 2. They feel more settled than City. They haven't lost a high-quality player in their squad. They've strengthened as well this summer. They still might get Mikel Merino as well. It feels like they are the more settled team.
I don't know if they are the more settled, but they have just improved season on season. Whereas I think if you look at City's performances last year compared to their treble-winning season, I do think they weren't as good. Like, I don't think I was convinced as convinced by City throughout last season as I was the year before. Whereas it felt like Arsenal, I don't know. I felt like Arsenal last season were the best team in the league, despite not winning it.
Yeah,
That was my feeling. Obviously, I didn't watch all 38 games of them, but throughout the season, I was more confident about them and their style of play. And it does feel like Arteta is slowly getting the better of Pep. Unbeaten against him last season, won more big games, came through in bigger moments. Like, that Arsenal team didn't really lose their heads or come unstuck defensively in the way they did the year before. So I just feel like it's the logical next step, and I think we yet to see Arsenal not improve season on season under Arteta. So yeah, that's why I've got that feeling. I think
it's going to be a fascinating title race, of course. Right, next team, we've discussed Wolves, Chelsea, Man City. Nieve, did you have another suggestion for a big side that could have a sticky patch?
Yeah, I've gone with Tottenham, but only because I wish people would be ever so slightly more patient with them as well. And to be honest with you, I actually think the one group of people that will be most patient are Tottenham fans. I don't think they will be expecting. I feel like everyone else is expecting more from Tottenham than their own supporters. Excitement around Archie Gray, which is so understandable off the back of the season with Leeds. But the position that he wants to play for Tottenham, he didn't even play that position for Leeds. So he turned 18 this year. So even players like that, let's just be patient with them. Let's give them the time they need and not throw them in the deep end. So this is not a player that he might burst onto the scene, but he's not a player that I'd want to put pressure on to change Tottenham's fortunes and take them above. And I'll go back to last season, and obviously Tottenham came 5th and they were just behind Villa. But I think Villa limped over the line to get to their 4th place finish. And they had their own issues towards the end of the season too. I don't think that position and closeness to top 4 means that with these extra couple of signings, all of a sudden they now become 4th best. And if they are to stick with Ange Postecoglou, which there's no suggestion that they shouldn't yet, I think it'll take much longer than this season. I don't think it's going to be in the past where it tends to be like his second year where it starts to improve. I still think there's quite a lot to be done. It feels like they've still got players in forward positions and midfield even, where I think there's maybe a few players that could be moved on still, where there's just numbers there for numbers' sake, but I don't think they're to the level of if you want to be a Champions League team. But then defensively, it's the complete opposite for me. And I don't think they've got anywhere near enough depth. And so I just think that perhaps we jump in the gun a little bit with them by thinking, 3rd, 4th place for them.
Interesting. I was going to ask you, around that 3rd, 4th mix, people would maybe put Man United. They maybe put Aston Villa. Do you see those two teams as being more settled than Spurs? Are you more confident about their ability to challenge for a Champions League qualification spot?
Yeah, I think Manchester United have got a much better team than Tottenham, the players. Manchester United was so unfortunate with injuries last season. I really do think that played such a big part of them.
But then Spurs fans will be saying Romero, Van de Ven missed big chunks of the season as well, just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, of course. But I still think, I don't know the specific numbers, don't quote me on it, but I still think Manchester United, in terms of the timing, I think with Manchester United what it was is just as they got going, they were hit with another injury. They could never build any sort of consistency, so we never really saw what Manchester United were about. We did see a glimpse of that at the start with Tottenham. We got to see their identity. and I'm not completely convinced by it as a Premier League idea. I like to watch it, but I'm not convinced by it across a whole season. But then also I look at other teams like Newcastle. To be honest, Aston Villa have got a little bit more work to do, I think, if they're going to stay around that area. They can. But Newcastle need to be back in the conversation for that. Sure. I think Newcastle will finish above Tottenham this season.
Yeah, well, it was interesting, actually, because when you were speaking about Spurs initially, it's almost about kind of, like this conversation is so much about perception, isn't it, of clubs. And like Newcastle last season, they had their difficulties, they had their injury problems as well. They were contending with Champions League football, obviously dropped out in the group stages, but that took a lot out of them in the first half of the campaign. And Trippier, defensively was not at the level that we've seen him, at his best, especially kind of around the middle part of the season. And so I think the perception was that it was a kind of bit of a difficult second year or a difficult year for Newcastle, having got top four in 2022-23. But the reality was that I think they ended the season with 85 goals scored. Like, I mean, Isak was on absolute fire. Like, there was so many reasons to be positive for Newcastle fans, but because they finished lower, we're not kind of speaking. They haven't like entered this conversation of like, are they going to underperform this season? Even though, like, you could argue that by the end of the year they were a much more impressive team than Tottenham. So I do see your point. Like, I think Spurs' like underlying numbers throughout last season were not particularly amazing. Like, I think in terms of like, I think they should have conceded a lot more. Vicario had an outstanding first season, didn't he? And maybe that was to do with the fact that Van der Ven and Romero like missed a fair amount of game time. But I think there is going to be that worry, and if Postecoglou remains very, very tied to his kind of way of doing things, which is super entertaining, but like can leave them very open at the back, then maybe we will see a similar thing with Spurs this season. Like, I think if it all clicks into gear, I think they are still very strong candidates for the top four. Like, I really do think that, and I think, say, comparing them to Man United, I still think Spurs at their best under Ange are more impressive than Man United at their best under Ten Hag have been. I think the best we've seen from United under Ten Hag is a pretty well functioning side, but not a side that necessarily spark fear into, say, Liverpool, Arsenal, or Man City. Even though he has got the better of them at points, it's not. I don't know. It's a little bit more. He's a bit more of an enigma, I think, Ten Hag, in terms of like his United career so far. So but I think, I don't know, ultimately the top four race is going to be ridiculous this year. I really think it's going to be so competitive. Like, the fact that we've had Newcastle and Villa make it in the last 2 years, I think really sends a signal to the rest of the big six clubs, and it just feels like it's a more even playing field than ever. It feels like it's Arsenal and City, and then it's like, what, 6 clubs going for 2 positions. Like, it is going to be ridiculously exciting in that sense. I see the concerns about Tottenham.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone would be surprised if Liverpool took a little bit of a drop off in these points wise. Under new management, haven't had a great summer of business. I know Arne Slot was keen to work with the squad he had. People have come back late from international tournaments as well. But who would be surprised if Liverpool dropped 5 points on last year's tally, maybe even a little bit more? With this seismic change going on behind the scenes as well. And
also just the lack of a number 6 so far. Like, I think that is a problem. Like, we talk about, City having Rodri. Like, Liverpool can't even get, his understudy in the Spain squad for 60 million euros. Like, that is a problem for them. And if they were dead set on him and they don't see a plan B for him, then I think that's going to be a bit of a headache for Slot, because clearly he really wanted like a 6 who could perform that kind of, perform like Zubimendi, someone who can pick up the ball really deep and is super press resistant. I think they can probably just about make it work with the midfield options they have, because they've kind of got so many of them, and if they're using a double pivot, then no one's going to be quite as exposed as, say, like a Casemiro playing with 2 roaming 8s in front of him, for example. But equally, like, I think that still does put them at a disadvantage, and it also plays into the narrative of them just like being unable to secure their top midfield target for the last 2 years now. that Tchouaméni deal to Real Madrid.
Yeah, they have missed out on a number of midfield targets over the last few years. Right, let's move on to another club who, they're not a big club in the same way as we've already talked about Chelsea, Man City, we've even mentioned Liverpool, but I think a club that have kind of gone under the radar with how difficult things might be for them this season is Leicester City. You look at the departure of Enzo Maresca, even though I did mention that drop-off in form towards the end of the season. Last year I think they lost 7 of their last 12 games, automatic, up in the air at one stage. They've now replaced him with Steve Cooper, completely different style of player, or at least had to prove that at Nottingham Forest, where there was players arriving every few days. It was a bit like a Maresca situation at Chelsea. Wasn't particularly helpful. They finished 16th in 2022, 2023. That was a season they signed 29 players. Absolutely incredible that he managed to even keep them up, I think, that year, despite the quality that did arrive at different points. Last year was fired around December time. They were 14th at the time, but were on a really bad run. I think they'd lost 5 of their previous 6. Steve Cooper, I think that's a difficult situation to go in after Enzo Maresca, after you just won the championship. And then you factor in the players that they've lost this summer. Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall's the big one, directly involved in 26 league goals last year, one of the championship's best players. Interesting move to Chelsea, interesting decision from him to join Chelsea, but was one of Leicester's key men last year. Jamie Vardy, 37 now, scored a decent amount of goals in the championship last year. I think it was 18, but his last year in the Premier League, I think he only managed 3 in 37. He's under huge pressure to get back to his goal scoring best in the Premier League after that disappointing year. They've also lost Kelechi Iheanacho. He was a bit more bit part, but he has experience of scoring regularly in the Premier League. There was one season there he scored 12. I think he's now gone to Sevilla. And then you look at their incomings, Fatawu, who was on loan last year from Sporting CP. That's exciting, but he's only 20 years old. That was his first year of playing regularly for any club, so that's a big ask for him to replicate his form that he showed in the Championship. They've also signed Caleb Okoli from Atalanta, a young centre-back whose defensive numbers really pop, but in terms of his passing, there's much to be desired there. So I think Leicester, no one's expecting them not to be in a relegation battle this year, but I think with that stylistic change from Maresca to Cooper and some huge absences, big pressure on Jamie Vardy, I think it could be worse than people expect. Mikey, who is your final suggestion?
My final one, I guess with Leicester, it depends. Like I think, given the financial constraints they're under, I think a lot of people would probably just take 17th, wouldn't they, with Leicester? But then again, it's going to be a competitive relegation battle, and I think partly because a side like Fulham, I think are in danger of dropping back into a relegation battle.
This is interesting because I see a lot of people online really bigging up Fulham's window and saying that I just think they've left themselves open personally.
I don't really,
especially as it stands right now with no João Palhinha replacement.
I don't really see where they've. The Emil Smith Rowe signing has like huge potential, right? Like Emil Smith Rowe when he came through at Arsenal was absolutely brilliant, and in those early days under Arteta, looked like an absolute star, looked like someone who Arteta would potentially build the team around. And it's unfortunate what's happened since, obviously, with those injuries and then not being able to get back into the side. But was still, sold for a record fee. Like, the potential upside there is massive. But then the rest of the business, hasn't been particularly great. I think Jorge Cuenca coming in from Villarreal, he looks like a good left-sided centre-back, and they need centre-back reinforcements with Tosin and Tim Ream both going. Of course, Palhinha going as well. They're trying to get Joachim Andersen back from Crystal Palace.
I just don't think that's very realistic.
Punchy.
Surely he's not going to swap Palace for Fulham.
Well, yeah, I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't. Equally, if Gehi does leave, does he, would he want to then, try and renew that centre-back partnership at Palace? But I agree. I think Palace is an infinitely more exciting project than Fulham right now. And and Palace I think are after around £40 million. Fulham haven't offered that yet. I think they're about at least 10 million short of that. They were at least 5-10 million short of Man United's valuation of Scott McTominay as well, so couldn't get that done. So as we're recording this, they don't have a midfielder. They haven't signed a midfielder, and their midfield options are just you got Harrison Reed, you got Sasa Lukic, Tom Kearney as the central midfield options. That's all you've got. They desperately need a defensive midfielder, I think, and it's not. and it's not just for the sake of having a defensive midfielder, it's because they are, I just see them being massively exposed without Palhinha. Like, I think like that their first season back in the Prem, what was it, 2 years ago under Marco Silva, like by all accounts they were one of the worst 3 teams in the league, and Palhinha's just kind of N'Golo Conte likeness was,
and Bernd Leno had an amazing
and Bernd Leno had an amazing, of course, I forget how many kind of certain goals that he saved, kept them in the league, and I think they finished 10th in the end. But like, it feels like Fulham have kind of been carried by vibes the last 2 years, and I think they did improve a bit last season, but Palhinha's influence is just, it was so big. I think, was it for 2 years that no one completed more tackles than him in Europe's top 5 leagues? The fact that he's gone to Bayern now shows what a linchpin that he is. And so I worry about Fulham like massively in that sense, and it's not like they've got like a lights out attack to be able to cover for that. Like maybe Iwobi and Emil Smith Rowe will link up really, really well. They've obviously got that Arsenal connection. Rodrigo Muniz had like a really amazing purple patch around March time last season and looked like a quality Premier League number 9, but that's all that's the only sample size we've had from him. Like, it doesn't feel like they've got an attack that can bail out a flailing defence, and I feel like that defence is going to be under a lot of pressure. Like Anthony Robinson, like the amount of tackles and interceptions he's going to have to make to make up for Palhinha's absence, I think is going to be absolutely huge. And I'm still yet to see like Marco Silva, as much as I think he's a pretty solid manager and has quite a lot of Premier League experience now. I'm still yet to see him with Fulham have like a consistent, cohesive style of play that says to me, like you deserve to be mid-table like every season. Like, it feels like he's had to rely on some outstanding performances from individuals in order to make that happen.
There we have it. Nieve, just quickly before we move on to ranking who's potentially got the biggest chance of flopping, relegation battle this year in the Premier League, do you think it's the newly promoted sides? Do you see anyone else? Maybe Fulham? Do you see any other teams slipping into that mix?
The newly promoted sides are, of course, in the most danger. Leicester, as you said, I think that Leicester team's not quite as good as the Leicester team that actually went down. Southampton have got key areas, I think, up front where it just doesn't feel Premier League ready. Ipswich, I'm still in that mindset in my head. When I say Ipswich could do it, am I actually saying that because I think they can do it, or because I desperately want them to do it? Because I think it'll be really good for the English game. It's hard. I think as every season progresses, we're going to really see that pattern emerge, where as that gap between the Championship and the Premier League increases more and more and more, it's going to be more hard than ever for teams to actually come into the league and stay in the league. And that's something that I've always been concerned about, and I'm really deeply concerned about.
Do you think there is that gap like widening then? Because I feel like the Championship, I don't know, like the amount of players, I guess this maybe plays into it, but the amount of players from the Championship who have come into the Premier League and instantly been a hit in the last few years suggests that the quality is actually going up in the Championship compared to the Prem.
Perhaps on an individual basis, you make a good point. I think the Championship's always been a good place to, but even League One, I think the English Pyramid's always great to collect players. And especially in the last few years, as more and more teams learn from Premier League managers and try and employ that on their level, and like the facilities a lot of these clubs have got for players. But yeah, in terms of the gap between the two, what it is, I think, is I'm more concerned not just between the gap between the Premier League and the Championship, but the gap between that league and then a select number of clubs that go between the two, because what their financial means are is just so far outweighs everybody else. And so let's say someone like a Luton comes up, or Ipswich this year, and it's a little bit more unexpected. I'm just really concerned about them because of the way that with PSR, but also with the extra amount of revenue that the Premier League that you gain, and then obviously the money that you gain from the parachute payments as well. It's going to create a strange dynamic, I think. We're going to start to get a little bit tired of it in the next few years.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think the newly promoted sides are in an issue this year as well. You look at the sides that were fighting down there last year. Nottingham Forest, Alanga, Gibbs White, Hudson-Odoi, Chris Wood are 1 year as forward options.
That's a big squad, isn't it?
It's just so much better than they can offer. Nikola Milenkovic going from Fiorentina to Nottingham Forest for £12 million. I think that's an amazing signing. Him alongside Murillo at the back. Forest, I think, will be better. Everton won't have points deductions this year. They deserve to be much higher in the league last year on the basis. So Fulham and Brentford, I think, might be in a little bit of a trouble. Maybe Wolves at a push, but I just think the gap is going to be pretty massive. But I'm with Nieve. I really hope that some of the newly promoted sides put up a good fight. And, last year it felt like Luton in particular, around that sort of December, January area were in a good position, but just slightly fell apart towards the end of the year. Before we go, guys, we do need to decide who is the big club with the highest potential of flopping. Nieve, of all the candidates we've heard, who are you most worried about?
Yeah, no, the thing is, I think my two don't think are going to have particularly as good seasons as maybe people expect, but I don't really consider it a flop. I just don't think that's the right word for it. That's the only issue. I think you still want to stick with Chelsea.
Yeah, I think Chelsea... I think it's just like from what we've seen in the past with Chelsea, it just feels like it already feels like it's going to be another season of chaos with Chelsea. But I think Fulham as well. I think Fulham are going to be caught short. I would be surprised if so they finished 10th there 2 seasons ago. They finished 13th last year. I'd be very surprised if Fulham managed a 13th place finish again. I can see them finishing bottom 5. So in that sense, maybe Fulham, but I think it's almost to be expected. Like I think with Chelsea, there is rightly more expectation on this squad of players from last season, but all the chaos of this summer, I think just sets them up really, really badly. So I would still be tempted to go for them. I think Spurs. I don't know. I think that I've still got hope for Spurs. I still think Spurs can be top 4 challengers, and it largely depends on whether Solanke's a hit, right? Like if Solanke's a big hit, then I think that transforms things, right? So yeah, I'm still relatively hot on them, but I certainly see it with Wolves. Although I think Gary O'Neill again has done such a solid job there. What were your two again? Leicester and City. Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with Chelsea.
Chelsea's not a bad shout. I'm going to stick with Man City. Obviously, flop is relative, but I am quite behind Arsenal winning the league this year, which Arsenal fans won't be happy to hear, actually, given my reputation as the Critchley curse on Twitter. So, yeah, sorry, Arsenal fans. It's over before a ball is kicked for you guys. But, guys, thank you so much for watching the Lowdown for this week. In particular, thank you very much for Nieve for being our guest. Thank you very much, Nieve. If people have no doubt enjoyed your presence here, where can they find more of your content?
Stump Peg on YouTube, but you'll receive a big shock because you'll be on there expecting Premier League content and you'll see 10th tier English football or Latvian league stuff. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Well, you can also catch her on the Overlap, on Saturday Social, numerous times. She's everywhere. She's absolutely brilliant. Mikey, thank you very much for joining me for this week.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for watching the Lowdown. Let us know in the comments what you'd like to see us cover on next week's show, and we'll catch you then. Bye-bye.